Israel expands its rampage across the Middle East with an attack on Qatar. We examine the fallout in Doha, the region, and beyond. Nepal erupts, its parliament torched by demonstrators angered by graft and censorship. Plus, South Africa, where whistleblowers have paid the ultimate price for exposing corruption. To say that Israel crossed a red line when it attacked Qatar this past week would be an understatement. Over the past 2 years, Israel has blasted through multiple red lines, illegally attacking Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iran, all while waging its genocidal assault on Gaza. But in bombing Qatar, one of Washington's closest non-NATO allies, the location of the largest military base in the Middle East, and the headquarters of this network, Al Jazeera, Israel has gone where no one thought it would. The target, according to the Israelis, was Hamas's senior leadership in Doha. The message could not be clearer. Israel is not interested in peace. It is prepared to fight an endless war to buy time for the total destruction of Gaza and the annexation of the West Bank. And it's a reminder that Israel feels it can act with impunity, shielded by unwavering backing from Washington, as well as a complicit media apparatus. And whether or not Donald Trump knew of the attack beforehand, this development marks a decisive moment, leaving the Arab world in a state of outrage, with all kinds of implications for geopolitics across the Middle East. One could forgive the average news consumer for growing weary from all the headlines over the past 2 years about Israel razing Gaza, extending its control of the West Bank, then bombing country after country across the Middle East. This most recent strike, however, on Doha was different.
John, this is an absolutely extraordinary moment that we are witnessing right now.
Israel said it was targeting Hamas officials who had gathered there to discuss a new ceasefire proposal, one that came directly from the White House, which puts this attack on Qatar, the 6th country Israel has bombed through the course of the genocide, in a category of its own.
There's a couple reasons why this strike is different and a new line that has been crossed. First, Qatar has been playing a central role in mediating negotiations between Israel and Hamas. And Israeli officials have traveled to Qatar to engage in these negotiations. And this has been the single most successful path for Israel towards getting Israelis captives out of Gaza. The other part is Qatar is a key American ally. And so for the Israelis to carry out a strike inside Qatar sets it apart from all of the other places where it has carried out strikes over the last couple of years.
There's a misconception in the US media. It's this idea that Qatar is hosting Hamas against the wishes of the United States, when in fact it's the contrary. Qatar is hosting Hamas at the request of the United States. In fact, what it's doing is playing the role of a broker. One of Israel's biggest complaints against Qatar is its coverage of the genocide in Gaza. Coverage from outlets like Al Jazeera has been very consistent in showing the extent of damage and destruction taking place on the Gaza Strip. This is a narrative that Israel obviously does not want in the international media, and so targeting Qatar as the host of Al Jazeera is also one of its aims in this war.
Because Al Jazeera has been the primary mainstream source of news on the genocide in Gaza, constantly broadcasting pictures from a war zone that Israel has locked the rest of the global media out of. 10 of the network's journalists have been killed. In many cases, they were targeted by the Israelis. The message this attack on Doha reinforces: Benjamin Netanyahu is not interested in a ceasefire in Gaza, and he is willing to go further than ever to prevent one. His forces have targeted Hamas negotiators before. More than a year ago, they killed Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of the group's political wing, but the Israelis waited until he had traveled from Doha to Tehran before doing that. This time, they went after Hamas officials in Qatar, a country that has tried to broker a peace deal, but Israel failed to kill any of them. Still, the Speaker of the Israeli parliament tweeted, "This is a message to the entire Middle East." How serious can Israel be about peace talks when it keeps targeting those on the other side of the negotiating table? When its own diplomats, like Israel's ambassador in Washington, warn that more assassinations are to come?
If we didn't get them this time, we'll get them the next time.
A message that back at home echoes across Israeli news outlets.
Reading and watching and listening to Israel media when events like the attack on Doha happens is very interesting because it's immediately paradoxical. On the one hand, some of them, an historical attack on Doha, eliminating Hamas leadership. There is almost kind of a triumphalist approach to this.
המטרה הייתה ברורה, להוריד את הקיצונים שהפריעו למשא ומתן, והפעולה הזו, בגלל הנחישות הצליחה, כן רועי.
But then the doubt starts to creep in.
אז התוצאות עדיין לא ברורות, אבל הערב הזה זה כבר לא נראה כמו הצלחה.
Followed by reality setting in, and that reality is that, well, this hasn't solved anything. This hasn't brought us closer to a solution. What is that actually achieving for us?
זה הדבר הנכון לעשות, ואני מבין שמבין השורות אני לא היחידי שחושב ככה, אלא שגם צמרת צה"ל חושבת ככה.
And the absence of any sort of vision for an end game here is a theme that has been recurring in Israeli media. There's also a lot of animosity towards Qatar in the Israeli press. The idea that, well, it's about time that Israel took this step.
By and large, the Israeli media has been nothing but completely supportive of the Israeli administration. There is some tut-tutting about the way that it has been done, but people are salivating over how clever this was.
אלו ימים לא פשוטים לישראל, אבל כשמגיע, וצריך לשמוח, אז קודם...
Ignoring the fact that they wouldn't be able to do what they're doing without the full-hilt support of the United States.
Which is why the questions being asked in the U.S. are, what did Donald Trump know about the Netanyahu government's plan to bomb Qatar, and when did he know it?
Israel would not have done this without the United States knowing.
The Israelis claim to have notified Washington just prior to the attack. Yet the Trump administration still seemed unprepared, almost blindsided by it, which had an undermining effect on Donald Trump's credibility, the image he likes to present of being in control.
It took quite some time for a reaction to come out from the White House, relayed by the press secretary reading a very carefully worded statement.
Sure. President Trump believes this unfortunate incident could serve as an opportunity for peace.
An attempt by the Trump administration to kind of walk this narrow line between legitimizing the targets of the strike while opposing the way the strike was carried out.
Unilaterally bombing inside Qatar does not advance Israel or America's goals. However, eliminating Hamas, who have profited off the misery of those living in Gaza, is a worthy goal.
The clear takeaway was that the Trump administration was at least posturing itself as unhappy with what Israel did. And so there's been a lot of reaction to that in the U.S. media.
What does President Trump do about this? He clearly was not happy yesterday.
And Trump has allies in the Arab world, but Israel's attack on one of them, Qatar, has shaken their trust in U.S. security guarantees, assurances those countries have counted on for decades. Hence, a regional summit meeting scheduled in Qatar starting on Sunday, where the Israelis are likely to see a unifying effect on the region, which would concern them. Particularly given the kind of rhetoric coming from the Qataris, which is unprecedented in many ways, how direct it is.
There is like a very minimum level of manners and ethics. This has crossed it.
If you could describe it in one word, what would that be?
This is state terror. That's what they call it.
And, worst of all, for the Israelis, they did not even succeed in killing their intended targets. One thing they did accomplish, they diverted attention away from the horror story that continues to unfold in Gaza, where the Israelis have told roughly 1 million Palestinians to clear out of Gaza City, hungry people who have nowhere safe left to go.
When I hear the IDF spokesperson tells Palestinians in Gaza to evacuate the city, what can only amount to a war crime. People maimed, traumatized, and then you tell them to move to a place that there is no space for 1 million people. Who is going to provide them with food, water, sanitation? Even if they are not killed by the army, many more will die. The only thing is for the international community, not just to condemn, but to bring this war to an end, because what is done to these people is inhumane.
Israel's actions, not only is it carrying out its genocide in Gaza, it's routinely bombing Lebanon. It has captured 400 kilometers of Syrian territory. It bombed the Yemeni cabinet last week. It killed the prime minister. It has bombed Iran. It has now bombed Qatar. This is a state that is completely out of control, and it surprises me that the narrative still has not caught up.
I actually don't hold any hope for the way that the press is going to be presenting all of this. They're a bunch of supine stenographers of empire, and those members of the press that are not supine stenographers of empire have been pushed out of their jobs, have been silenced, smeared, and we see that across the first world. That is what is horrific and horrifying about this situation.
It has been a seismic political week in Nepal, with protests over corruption and nepotism, the fall of the government there, and the spark that set the country alight, public outrage over a crackdown on political speech. Meenakshi Ravi has been tracking this story.
The images coming out of Kathmandu this past week were historic. Parliament ablaze, the Supreme Court attacked, media offices torched, and the government toppled. Yet, what has unfolded in Nepal goes far beyond a few days of unrest. Public anger has been simmering for years over corruption, joblessness, yawning inequality, and above all, brazen impunity. That anger crystallized just days before the protests in a viral campaign exposing the lives of politicians' Nepo kids, flaunting luxury cars and designer clothes, posted alongside images of laborers working abroad in harsh and often dangerous conditions, many coming back home in coffins. The government came down swiftly, giving social media firms a week to register with the Ministry of Communications under new rules. Most didn't meet the deadline, and 26 platforms, from WhatsApp and Facebook to WeChat, Reddit, and YouTube, were banned. Instead of containing public anger, the social media ban sent it spiraling. Even after the ban was lifted, protesters flooded Kathmandu's streets. Police opened fire, and chaos quickly took hold. Amongst the many targets of vandalism were the offices of two leading news outlets, Kantipur Media Group and Annapurna Media Network. Nepal's big media houses, owned by powerful private interests, have long been accused of siding with the establishment and underplaying abuses of power. Protesters say their movement was hijacked by violence, and the slogan trending in Nepal is, "This is not us." The country is now in a tense, unsettled state. The army has stepped in, patrolling streets, guarding parliament, and calling for dialogue. A new generation is demanding real change, and the outcome is anything but certain.
Thanks, Meena. It has been more than 30 years now since the end of apartheid in South Africa, yet racial inequality there has persisted in the democratic era. And while the legacy of apartheid is not going away, the story that gets most of the coverage these days is the rampant corruption under the rule of the African National Congress, the ANC, not without reason. Billions of taxpayer dollars have been siphoned off, ending up in the wrong pockets, fueling poverty, widening inequality, eroding public trust. And exposing that corruption can come at a cost. Journalists face intimidation, but often it's their sources, whistleblowers, who pay the ultimate price. A number of them have been murdered, revealing how a democratic country has failed those brave enough to come forward with the truth. The Listening Post's Nick Muirhead now on corruption, the people exposing it, and the price that can be paid by those blowing the whistle in South Africa.
Last month, on a wine farm just outside of Cape Town, a journalist met with the subjects of his investigation. Pieter-Louis Myburgh had already exposed how a public entity called the Independent Development Trust, the IDT, had awarded part of a government tender amounting to 836 million rand, nearly $50 million to a ghost company. His reporting then led him to the trust's CEO, Devoshum Moodley-Veera, who appeared to be getting a kickback from a different tender. When Moodley-Veera got wind of the story, she, along with the IDT spokesman, Pasha Makholane, set up a meeting with Myburgh.
I want it closed. I don't want you to be writing about it.
What they didn't know was that the journalist was going to film it. Let's start with your decision to secretly film the meeting with Moodley-Veera and Makholane. What was it about your interactions with them that made you suspicious?
I was out of the blue contacted by the IDT spokesperson Makholane in early June 2025 this year. And the very nature of the conversation indicated to me very clearly that this was not going to be a normal journalist to spokesperson interaction. He said that he had very sensitive things to discuss with me. He said there were mutual matters that we could explore. I knew that this was heading to a situation that some sort of an offer was going to be made.
Okay, let's firm it up. So what did you bring today?
What they were trying to bury was Myburgh's next revelation. The IDT had awarded a tender to a businessman named Colin Mashawana for a scheme that was meant to create jobs for low-income workers. As the IDT money began to roll in, Mashawana started funding the construction of a new house for Moodley-Veera in an upmarket Johannesburg estate.
I think that those monies were used for the house.
Yeah.
So, you don't want any...
No, I don't.
But while the CEO got a luxury home, the workers of the scheme went unpaid for months.
So nobody in this room got a payment in November? No. Nobody got a payment in December? No.
To stop the publication of such a damaging revelation, the IDT execs tried to bribe Myburgh with around $3,500 in cash. And when the journalist couldn't be bought, they went after his journalism.
So there is an effort underway to create an alternative narrative to the one that we're putting out, one in which our reporting is put under suspicion.
The allegations of corruption, as I have said, they have been coming for the whole year now through Daily Maverick, but they have not been proven.
But also there has been an urgent interdict to bar us from reporting on any of these matters involving Colin Mashawana, the business person.
Mashawana's bid failed, and the court has given the Daily Maverick the green light to continue reporting on its investigation on corruption allegations.
So there are very real efforts underway to prohibit our work and to stop us from further investigating these matters.
South Africans were able to see corruption on video, where a person is placing money in front of the journalist. And we're very grateful that Peter had the presence of mind to set up cameras to record the entire thing, because there are so many people who often don't believe that people are corrupt when they get exposed in the news.
Songezo Zibi is a former newspaper editor turned politician. Last year he ran for president on an anti-corruption ticket but wasn't elected. However, for the first time in the democratic era, the African National Congress lost its majority, damaged in no small part by the corruption that has plagued its rule. The party was forced into a coalition.
Our people have spoken.
Under the new government of national unity, Zibi was elected as chair of the Committee on Public Accounts and tasked with rooting out corruption.
Look, corruption is a cancer. I mean, in every country you can describe it that way, but in South Africa it is particularly so because there are so many poor people. We need to be able to use every cent that the government collects efficiently, which means we need to get the best value for money that we can get. And corruption takes that away.
We definitely have unresolved structural issues because of apartheid. It's a blight on this country's history, and many of those issues need urgent redress. But we as investigative journalists have a duty to hold power to account. And those in power now have a very real opportunity to direct billions of rands in funding to the very cause of redressing some of those past ills. Instead of doing that, because of industrial scale corruption, those funds are being diverted to private pockets.
A story is only ever as strong as its source, and in South Africa, whistleblowers are crucial. But corruption here doesn't just drain public coffers, it kills. Nearly 150 municipal workers have reportedly been murdered since 2018, most of them for blowing the whistle on corruption. The case that has come to symbolize the war on whistleblowers in South Africa is that of Babita Karan, an official in the Gauteng Health Department. In 2021, Karan identified that over a 4-month period at the Tembisa Hospital, there were suspicious tenders amounting to 850 million rand, nearly $50 million. Money that should have been spent on healthcare for some of the most vulnerable people in South Africa. So she froze the payments and blew the whistle, knowing full well, as one of the last messages she ever sent shows, the danger she was in.
When she was performing her due diligence with the transactions, she picked up an exorbitant amount of money going into the Tembisa hospital. And she reported this to her supervisor, the corruption that was occurring within the health department. And a report was submitted by her to the supervisor and requested an investigation. And yeah, 2 weeks later, she was gunned down outside of her home.
A new book by investigative journalist Jeff Wicks, who used evidence Karan uncovered along with his own reporting, showed that the looting at Tembisa Hospital was, over a 2-year period, closer to $130 million.
And there's very little evidence that of the 2.3 billion rand spent by Tembisa Hospital that anything was actually delivered.
He also exposed glaring failures in the investigation of Karan's assassination. 4 years on, the hitmen are behind bars, the masterminds remain at large. Wicks and activists like Devoshum Moodley-Veera are demanding stronger protections for whistleblowers.
As I stand here, I worry. I worry for whistleblowers putting the national interest first.
Because, as Moodley-Veera puts it, the current laws in South Africa aren't just inadequate, they are kept weak by design. Why is the system so deeply flawed, and why does it seem like there's no political will to fix it?
The answer I can give you is self-preservation. There are a number of instances where high-level politicians, high-level government officials are involved in fraud and corruption. And if you implement any act to address whistleblower protection, it means that it will be very damaging to them. They will be exposed.
Let me share an example with you. We're busy with an inquiry into possible corruption amounting to billions of rand. So the Police Crime Intelligence Unit does a threat assessment on myself, and they determined that I should get police protection. That was 3 months ago. I still don't have it. I'm chair of the most important public finances committee in Parliament. I battled to get protection. What chance does an ordinary South African have? I am convinced that for whistleblowers, we leave them on their own, and it's done deliberately to make sure that the corruption continues.
In 1992, on the cusp of democracy, anti-apartheid hero Chris Hani issued a warning. What I fear is that the liberators emerge as elitists who drive around in Mercedes-Benzes, use the resources of this country to live in palaces and gather riches. 6 months later, Hani was assassinated by a right-wing extremist. He never lived to see his fear come true. 30 years on, corruption has hollowed out the state, draining resources from the people the ANC fought so hard to liberate. And those who resist, be they journalists or whistleblowers, are met with bribes or bullets.
It feels that we're not winning the fight against fraud and corruption in South Africa. And it feels that our voices are not being heard as South African citizens. So what are we trying to say? Are we trying to say that we need to keep quiet and be silenced through this and not speak out and expose these issues? I don't think we are really living the South Africa that we want to live in.
And finally, Charlie Kirk, one of America's most powerful conservative influencers, was murdered this past week in front of thousands of students at a public event on a college campus in Utah. Kirk founded Turning Point in 2012, a youth movement that mushroomed in size and came to hold significant sway over Republican politics. His sometimes bigoted views, constantly divisive rhetoric, and conspiracy theories won him millions of followers and apparently turned him into a political target. The assassination has chilled public figures and influencers in the U.S., and not just those on the right. Their opposite numbers on the liberal side now have reason to fear some kind of revenge attack might target them. And in a country with so much inflammatory political language coming out online, a place with such lax gun laws, those fears are not misplaced. And that, no matter what you think of Charlie Kirk's politics, is the really disturbing part of this story, the part that may be still to come.